Welcome to the Youth Voice, a new podcast and blog giving young people a voice in politics. So today we're joined by Gerry Carroll MLA for West Belfast and leader of People Before Profit in the North. So thank you for joining us, Gerry.
Thanks for having me.
So I think we'll launch straight into the questions. Recently in Wales, in local government elections, our young people have been given the opportunity to vote at 16. Something that I and a lot of young people in the North want to see brought in. So where do you and People Before Profit stand in this, both in the North and in the South, for votes at 16?
Yeah, we're absolutely fundamentally for and in favour of votes at 16. To be honest with you, I don't see or understand, never mind agree with the argument to not allow people at 16 to vote. The only argument that you sort of see, if you read between the lines, is that the government think that all young people are radical and that therefore don't want them to vote at 16. And I'm sure there's an element of truth maybe in some of that. But nevertheless, young people are paying taxes, young people are working, young people can do many things, and I think they should be able to vote. I don't see, again, the rationale or the argument against it. And obviously there's a bit of a patronising thing sometimes towards young people that says they don't understand or they're not interested or engaged in politics. I think that's factually incorrect. You look at debates around Scottish independence, Brexit, debates a while ago about free education, EMA. I mean, all those debates in the last 10 years or thereabouts, young people have been at the centre of them. Have been very articulate. So I think the evidence is mountain high for young people to be allowed to vote at 16. So we absolutely support it, endorse it, and I think it should be in place a long time ago.
Yeah. And one of the big kind of things that people say is, oh, young people don't understand politics or young people aren't able to engage. But I think if I went, onto any street in Belfast or walked out in front of, City Hall where you'll have people protesting, if I grabbed any one of them, over, 30, how many of them are going to be explaining the Hunt system of, allocating ministers or something like that, Like, whereas if I go into my A-level politics class and I grab anybody, any of them could explain something like that. Or even, how elections run the country. A lot of people don't know. Yet, if you go into an A-level politics class or even any general group of people who understand politics that are young, they can easily explain these things, whereas a lot of older people can't.
Yeah, some may say some elected representatives may not even understand that process. Not obviously counting myself in that, but maybe I would be a bit cheeky on myself. But I totally agree, and part of that is to reflect the kind of disengagement the many sort of older or middle-aged people may have, and I emphasize may have, because Stormont is pretty antiquated and out of date. But the fact that those people may be disengaged from Stormont or from politics generally for all sorts of reasons, shouldn't therefore merit those people losing the right to vote if they want to. And similarly, if young people are very engaged or somewhat engaged or even not engaged at all, they still have a right, and they should have a right to vote if they are exercised by a certain issue. So yeah, I think it's just, it seems to me, just people who want to defend an old system. It took a long time for working class people, men initially, to get the vote. It took a long time for women and then working class women to get the vote. And it seems to be those who want to defend the status quo or may concede at some point, but they're willing to do all they can now, to basically let young people know, stay in your place, be quiet. And I think that's not a good approach to politics, never mind the run of societies. But like I say, I think the ground has fallen underneath from those who are still opposed to it.
Yeah, I think a large part of that as well is the 18 to 24 bracket of voters now is a lot of them don't vote. I think it's nearly 50% of 18 to 24-year-old voters don't vote. But I think a large part of that comes down to, in school, we're not educated about politics unless you specifically take it as an A-level. Most people don't know how electoral systems work because they're not educated. You're not given the opportunity as you're younger to build good habits of actually going out to vote, taking part in democracy, knowing whenever you're moving on to university at 18, if you're on the electoral register and your address changes, will you be removed? There's so many different aspects that people aren't taught about, and it causes such low voter turnout. If that entire 50% bracket took part, you could completely change the face of Stormont and everybody in it. It could be a completely different party makeup.
Yeah, totally. I think so. That, and also, I mean, the fact that people in many ways engage in politics on a daily basis, maybe pre-COVID, in terms of if they're involved in a credit union or involved in a community group or a trade union, or maybe even sort of a community organisation. In many ways, that's politics. So I agree that people should be taught, and not just those who do politics, about the structures of Stormont and sort of parliaments and assemblies, and that's important and vital. But also, the politics that people do engage in or can engage in should be, explained and accessible, and discussed and debated, rather than kind of a sort of a, how would you say, kind of an easy form of politics being presented. I would like to see more debates and discussions in schools, and I think part of that could garner the interest of people in politics generally. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and I think one of the big steps that has went towards, giving young people a voice was this new youth assembly. But in my opinion, there has been, attempts, and there has been youth parliaments, in England, and there has been Northern Irish representatives going over. But the youth parliament over there is meant to be apolitical. Now, I don't really understand how you can have a parliament that is apolitical, but there is a lot of worry there that, it's just going to be a bunch of young people gathering in Stormont, not having any actual effect, because at the end of the day, a lot of politicians refuse to listen to younger people. But I know your party has been in support of it. But I think if it is going to happen, it needs to be given actual power. Like, I'm not saying it should be making laws for everybody, but, given some kind of actual proper influence over Stormont.
Yeah, I mean, we might be in a better place if we're run by sort of 16, 17-year-olds maybe than some of the ministers up here, honestly. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the youth assembly, I think, is a great idea. Maybe it was last year or 2 years ago, the youth forum were involved. I think other organisations, not Youth Forum, and other organisations were involved in a kind of a mini kind of convening of what an assembly would look like, in Stormont. I know that's not the title of the event, but that's my quickest shorthand way of describing it. But it was a really, really, brilliant idea, and you saw young people. I know I kind of sound maybe a bit patronising saying this as somebody my age, but people really just lighting up the debate. Talking about Irish language, sort of trans rights, young people, mental health, and they kind of, in a way that they were like, behind, on point, passionate, and I think it was a good example and a good sort of, how would you say, showcase of what young people could do. So yeah, I totally agree about more powers for that. I raised it there last week in Stormont about the youth assembly getting proper funding, so to ensure that it's not reliant upon ministers sitting in place, because obviously there's a period of time there, 3 years, where there's no ministers, and for all intents and purposes, the youth assembly work on it in terms of installment. I think effectively grounded to halt, or certainly couldn't proceed. So that's some of the issues that I've been raising, and youth forum and others have been raising. So yeah, I would be in favour of youth assembly having more, powers or resources maybe. I mean, I don't know if this is in the terms of reference, but why couldn't the ministers and the executive, all between them, make an appearance once a year, to the youth assembly? May not sound like a lot, but in the absence of anything being written, in the statute or in the rules, I think it would be a good thing for young people to go, right. Once a month we have a chance to quiz and press a minister, and they have a site of, or how would you say, a diary of who's coming up, so they can prepare their questions, and yeah, so I think that would be a fantastic idea if we can incorporate that, into the youth assembly, as well as some resources. So I think it's a good idea, and I suppose, yeah, I don't know how it can be apolitical. I mean, everything is political, especially all the things that happen in this assembly and the youth assembly. But yeah, those young people that I've sort of seen around the forum and other groups, I think are well capable of put ministers, maybe if not in their place, and certainly under scrutiny. So yeah, I would support all those kind of ideas.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the big parts of your party, People Before Profit, is the idea of, a 32 county socialist republic, and this whole idea of, actually focusing on workers and representing workers. One of the things I noticed in the difference between minimum wage in the south, and I know living wage and stuff in the south, it's more expensive to live in the south, but for somebody who's under 18 up north, it is 4.55 the minimum wage for a 16-year-old up here, but in pounds. But then whenever you look at it in the south, it works out at a really, if you're looking at a really bad euro rate, 5.83. Would you push for both a raise in minimum wage for everybody, but specifically for young people who are doing part-time work and things like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's calls for sort of different levels. Some people are pushing for a £15, I think, living wage, isn't it? And others are kind of, excuse me, present for a minimum wage to be increased, and we'd support that for every sector in society, young people, older people, everybody. And the fact is that people are struggling to live. Young people have been, maybe not in school or university in the last period, but they've been working in supermarkets, working in restaurants when they're opened, and sort of hospitality and retail generally. So at the very least, in order to recognise the role that they've done throughout the pandemic, I think there needs to be an increase in the minimum wage. So yeah, we would definitely support it being raised across the island. I mean, obviously, as you said or indicated, it's more expensive in Dublin and the south generally, but that doesn't mean that people in the north and young people should be subject to a low rate of pay because it's more expensive in the south. And I think generally speaking, in terms of the All Ireland, United Ireland dimension, we want to see sort of the best approach happening across the island, in the sense of, okay, there's aspects in the north that don't exist in the south. There's a NHS, which is obviously underfunded, but is an important tool and sort of thing in our society. We would like to see that extended right across the island. There's rights in the south that people in the north don't have in relation to women's rights, abortion rights. Suppose up until recently, equal marriage wasn't available in the north. So we would like to see the sort of the best policies being implemented right across the island for everybody in the island, whether they're in South Armagh, South Donegal, South Cork, or South Belfast, or wherever. And I think workers' rights has to be at the centre of any New Ireland or United Ireland for us. Otherwise, people may not even vote for it, even if they do come from a traditional nationalist community. And also, we'll have to strive for something better, and we cannot repeat the past mistakes of adopting a 21st century version of labour must wait. I think that would be detrimental to the impact of many workers, and the young ones that you refer to.
And I suppose one of the big things in the news at the minute is this Northern Ireland, 100-year celebration. One of it has drawn one side, nationalists seem to be very against it, which is very understandable. Unionists see it as, something that has to be done. We have to celebrate, the centenary of the state. Where does People Before Profit stand on the whole centenary issue?
Certainly what we're celebrating, to be blunt about it. But we will be, engaged in some form of discussion around it. It's a seminal moment, obviously. Maybe a bit of an understatement, but a seminal moment in history for people on the island, not just in the north. Our perspective is, like the main. I think our lights went off there. Sorry, the motion sensor. Nothing else. The main what do you call it? I lost my train of thought there. What was I saying? Partition. Yeah, the main opponents of partition obviously stem from those in the sort of nationalist Republican camp, or community, if you will. But there is a tradition, maybe sometimes buried or not referred to enough, of a socialist tradition on partition, which sees and seen the sort of formation of the northern state as part of a carnival of reaction, as Connolly said, part of a counter-revolution, which installed not only one reactionary sectarian state in the north, but a reactionary, bigoted, and cruel state in the south. So we don't want to celebrate that, but what we will seek to do as best as we can is to try and commemorate and remember those radicals, revolutionaries who fought for a basic sense of liberty and equality and justice. And not only was that people, from the sort of traditional United Ireland camp, if you will, but it's also, the many thousands of what they were called rotten prods who were kicked out of the shipyards in East Belfast. Obviously, many Catholics were expelled from workplaces in 20 and 21. But also we had a sort of slew of radical Protestants, communists and sort of socialists and Labour people who were kicked out of the shipyards and other workplaces. So we want to recognise that, not just as a historical point, which in and of itself is pretty interesting, but to say that these binary camps that people are placed in politics in the north in particular aren't fixed, aren't sort of everlasting, and can be challenged, overturned, cracked away at. So yeah, we won't be commemorating, we won't be looking at any special stamps or whatever is being proposed by the NIO, but we will, as best as we can, be seeking to engage in a lot of discussion and debate around the issue and what it meant for people, primarily in the north, but also across the island, and we'll be attempting to place it in a position which was the creation of the Northern State was part of a rolling back of the revolutionary tradition and movement in Ireland, which I think has been to the detriment of everybody across this island. So I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but we'll be seeking to do all of that, or as much of that as we can.
Okay. And one just because of time, one final thing. Your party during the Brexit referendum supported Brexit, which a lot of people, saw issue with, which when you actually look back, Brexit isn't exactly a right-wing idea. It was just kind of pirated by right-wing fundamentalists who led the campaign. But then you campaigned against the idea of a Tory Brexit, which, is what it looks like we're going to get, either that or a no deal. What is the people for profit position on Brexit now, and what can you see happening, or what do you want to happen?
Yeah, well, I suppose 4 years ago now, we took a position that effectively said, you kind of alluded to it there. We have no illusions in the European Union as a democratic or just entity. Anybody who believes that should look at the fortress Europe that it created. The thousands of Mediterranean dead bodies. Refugees fleeing Libya and other places in the Middle East, trying to get into sort of Europe, as it's presented as a wonderful place. And those were drowned and died as a result of the hard border that the EU in place. So, and many other issues and problems with the EU. But obviously, as you said, the referendum was a binary yes or no. And obviously on both sides there was people who, or certainly I, despised. So obviously on one side you have the horrible likes of Farage, vote saying leave, but also arguing for Remain. You have the detestable Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell, people who are war criminals. And I think, in that context, a socialist argument for leaving and not endorsing the EU wasn't really heard in any real sense in the north, and maybe even arguably in Britain at all. And that's maybe to understand that is maybe a discussion for a different day, because it's quite long-winded to untangle that. But in short, what we wanted to see, or what we have said since, is that any deal should be put to the people in the north. So I don't have any illusions. I'm not a supporter of the European Union, but I recognise that people in the north voted to remain and stay in the European Union. I am a Democrat. I think that people in the north should have their wishes and their vote respected. The British state do not. What do you call him? Boris Johnson and even May refuse to sort of accept that basic point. Similarly, the people in Scotland, they're being told they must, shut up and deal with the vote in England, essentially, as a result of what should be in place for Scotland in the north. So we're saying any final deal should be put to people in the north for a referendum. But also, I mean, the fact that we're having a renewed and sped up conversation about United Ireland is because of Brexit. That's because, there's been a crack in the British state. There's been really sort of monumental shift in attitudes and beliefs amongst many people. People maybe traditionally from a soft U or small U unionist background are now kind of open to the possibility of United Ireland, mostly to be sort of remain inside the European Union. But all these kind of certainties are thrown up in the air. They're in a flux. And for us, we think that people in the north should have their say. The British state should not be imposing any deal or even attempting to impose, if you can, a no deal. And they've ignored concerns about the border all along, and treated people in the north as just irrelevant and at best a nuisance. So we think that approach has been wrong. It's been damaging, and ultimately people should be listened to in the north. Should have say and a vote on any final deal. Which is what we have argued from 2016. But ultimately, we operate on the basis of we don't trust or have any illusions in London or Brussels to operate in the interest of people, whether in Belfast, Armagh, Dublin, Derry, or wherever, because they essentially, whilst they have disagreements, obviously on Brexit, they're fundamentally united in ensuring that people, the profit margins of the wealthy aren't challenged, corporations aren't challenged, and yeah, we'll do our best to try and put forward that alternative as best as we can in these sort of choppy waters.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you've said there, and I think we're going to wrap it up there. So thank you very much for coming on, and to those who will be listening to this, should hopefully go up within a day or two of it being recorded. Hopefully next time we'll have Senator Mary Siri Kearney of Fine Gael, that she'll hopefully be our next guest. So thank you for tuning in.